Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lingering Impacts and the Path Forward, 15 years after the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster. This virtual roundtable is made possible by the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast, which is the leading business organization working to ensure the long-term health and economic vitality of the Atlantic seaboard through responsible waters, through responsible stewardship of the coastal and ocean waters, excuse me. Today, we will hear remarks from Representative Frank Pallone of New Jersey, then move into conversation with our panelists, who I'll introduce shortly. But first, we want to observe a moment of remembrance for the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, which 15 years ago on April 20th, 2010, when an explosion occurred aboard the Deepwater Horizon, killing 11 workers and setting off what would come to be known as the largest marine oil spill in the history of the petroleum industry. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelist, Peg Howell, to remember those 11.
Yes, let me just take a minute to name them. Jason Anderson, Aaron Dale Burkeen, Donald Clark, Stephen Curtis, Gordon Jones, Roy Wyatt Kemp, Carl Dale Keplinger Jr., Blair Manuel, Dewey Rivette, Shane Roshto, and Adam Weiss. We hold them in our hearts.
Thank you so much, Peg. Really important that we know and never forget what happened that day. We're going to move into some brief remarks from Representative Frank Pallone.
Here at the Jersey Shore, the coast and our beaches and clean water is what we're all about. So I was very happy last fall when President Biden issued an executive order saying there could be no more drilling for oil and gas off the Atlantic coast, including the Jersey Shore. But now President Trump issued an executive order to try to reverse that. That's illegal. Once it was done by President Biden, it can't be reversed. But just in case, myself and Senator Booker are introducing the Coast Anti-Drilling Act to make, as a matter of law, as a matter of federal law, that any kind of drilling for oil and gas off the Atlantic coast, including the Jersey Shore, should not be allowed. And we're going to fight to protect the Jersey Shore.
All right. Thank you so much to the representative for providing us with some remarks for our conversation today. Really important to know that we still have members in Congress who truly care about this issue and are willing to defend and protect our coasts from the threats of offshore drilling. Next, I'm going to introduce our great panelists before we head into this discussion. Today, we're joined by Peg Howell, who is a founding member of Stop Offshore Drilling in the Atlantic, as well as a former offshore engineer. We have Marilyn Hemingway, who is the CEO and president of the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce. And finally, we have Sandra Bundy, who is president of the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast. So I'm going to give our panelists just a few minutes to share a bit more about their background and why they felt so called to work to fight against offshore drilling. And then we'll open it up for some broader discussion about sort of where we are now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can all see each other. And Peg, I think I'll turn it over to you first.
Great. Well, my name is Peg Howell. I'm a retired petroleum engineer. I graduated from Marietta College in the late 70s and was the first woman to become a company man in the Gulf of Mexico. That was in the late 70s, early 80s. At the time that I went into offshore drilling, you may recall, those of us who lived then, that the country was in the middle of an oil crisis. There had been 2 Arab embargoes, and the country was short on domestic oil and gas supply. So it was the patriotic thing to do, to join the ranks of those who worked in oil and gas to try to get us a better future for tomorrow. As it turned out, though, our planning horizon then, due to the technology we had at the time, was pretty much 40 years. And my personal expectation was that by now we would have shifted to renewable and alternative fuels and shifted away from oil and gas. with the advent of directional drilling and other technologies, the oil and gas industry has grown tremendously and is now, the US is now the world's leading supplier of oil and natural gas. I'm going to say it again because most people don't know that. We are the world's leading producer of oil and gas. So, in that context, why am I fighting against offshore oil and gas drilling? One is we don't need it. Two is we don't need to explore offshore anymore. We've got ample supply. Two is we have proven technologies that we can shift to and shift away from the oil and natural gas that's caused problems with our environment and is a leading cause of climate change. And three, on a more personal level, when April 20th, 2010 occurred, the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe, I was personally shook. I couldn't believe that the industry would let this horror happen, and in their continuing efforts to get deeper, cheaper, which is what we used to say in the oil and gas business. So I'm here today, and I have been fighting for some time now against additional development of oil and gas reserves in our offshore areas, and will do so until the day I die. So that's pretty much why I'm here today, Claudia.
Thanks, Peg. Happy to have you here today. Marilyn?
Well, good greetings. My name's Marilyn. Hemingway has noted I'm CEO and president and founder of the Gullah Geechee Chamber. And it's interesting how I came to be in this position as a anti-offshore drilling individual. But let me start with the cultural ties, the chamber, and how we got involved. The cultural ties, Deepwater Horizon, Gulf of Mexico, etc. Louisiana, we have family there. We're all West African, the enslaved persons who were brought to North America. So that's family that's being harmed along with the broader population. So we cannot disconnect ourselves from that. Plus, the land, the horizon looks very similar. Uh, Low country is low for a reason, and we see the harm from the oil industry, but Deepwater Horizon was like this tremendous gash in the heart of the culture. And that brought our attention to it and made advocates out of us when it came to offshore drilling. Uh, the more local connection is after I met Peg. I don't know if it was before or after I met Peg, but I knew Peg because I called her on the phone because I was so upset. I was invited to a meeting in Charleston uh, about Georgetown, which is our hometown, the third oldest city in the state of South Carolina, and it's a port city. Charleston's an hour away from Georgetown, so that's very important to note. And the economic development director at the time for the county was also there. And I think we were only two people from Georgetown in a meeting discussing Georgetown, a meeting hosted by the oil industry. And they talked about what they were going to do with Georgetown. The old naval airport in Georgetown was the perfect size for planes that they use in the oil industry to fly in. They had plans to do barges on in our port that would go out and get the oil and bring it back and load it onto the truck. So Georgetown has the uh, minimum infrastructure for them to come in and invest in larger oil industry infrastructure, which would definitely harm the local population, the Gullah Geechee, the cousins, the family of those in New Orleans, Louisiana, but also the broader population. They also talked about the jobs because they were trying to sell it. Offshore drilling is going to bring all these wonderful jobs. And that's when they admitted that most of the jobs that were going to be on the rigs were going to be doctorates, not local folks, but they would get jobs because they would create a lot of jobs in the new restaurants and service industry that would be created to provide services for the oil industry. I realized at that time that this was not a win for the community at all. It was not an environmental win, and it was not an economic win, in spite of the sales job that was going on an hour away from the town that they were going to have this huge impact on. And I remember coming back talking to Peg, and we already had these conversations, right? I was already anti, but I was even more so almost in tears that folks who did not understand my hometown, my culture, were ready to change it for pure greed. And that was it. And without hearing the voices of the local folks, and they knew it because they held this potentially life-changing meeting, not in the town, so the local folks could understand, but outside, so the players in the oil industry, the lobbyists could have their discussion and how they can move forward in making it happen. And that was the final turning point for me. I was already well into anti-offshore drilling, but that was the final nail in the coffin for me that I had to fight back. And I've been doing it ever since.
And we appreciate you for that. Thank you, Marilyn. Sandra, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Bundy. I'm the president of BAPAC. I'm also a local real estate broker and a lifetime resident of the South Carolina coast. I grew up in Murrells Inlet, which is a very small pocket estuary on the northern coast of Georgetown County. And throughout my lifetime, have seen and lived among the beauty of this estuary and have grown to appreciate it so much. And when I first started hearing about this oil drilling off the coast and became aware of a group called SODA, Stop Offshore Drilling in the Atlantic, I immediately felt like I needed to do something, and that something was to devote my time to those meetings. And I must say, Peg Howell is a wonderful teacher because she knew so much about the oil industry. But after watching what happened with Deepwater Horizon and understanding the impacts that they're having there that are still going on to this day, I really felt like I must do something. And my family history is my father was brought the first Gulfstream commercial headboat to Murrells Inlet. And that boat was used formerly as the crew boat for the oil and gas industry. And it's just like, how could this happen that they're going to turn something off our coast from the fishing industry, commercial fishing, and everything else, and sell it for oil and gas? So, as time went on, we had a meeting in Myrtle Beach, and I think there was somebody there from every state along the coast, and we had discussed that it would be really worth our time and attention to form a business alliance that works specifically to protect our coast from offshore drilling and seismic testing. And that was really where BAPAC was born and has brought us to this point today. I mean, we have been in this space for a long time. We have a lot of supporters up and down the East Coast, and it is so important to our coastal economy that we have clean water, clean beaches, and we just oil and water doesn't mix. So that's how we got here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that background. I think hopefully now it's clear to our audience just exactly who we're dealing with. Some people who really know the issue forwards and backwards and are not messing around. So I want to take advantage of some of the sort of collective knowledge that we have here today, and get into a few discussion questions to better understand why offshore drilling just is not an option in the 21st century. So I'm going to run through a couple questions, take it pretty easy. I don't need an answer from everybody, but feel free to take yourself off mute if you have an answer. So first, I want to start with sort of the theme of today's conversation, Deepwater Horizon. You all gave some great background about how that event impacted each of you and impacted your communities. But I'm also curious, what was the sort of most alarming or maybe compelling thing that you learned about offshore oil and gas impacts in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon disaster? What really stood out to you?
I suppose I can jump in first and move this along. The extent of the catastrophe was shocking to me, having been someone who ran a rig, who knows about blowouts, who knows the safety protocols involved, how to shut in a well when it's blowing out. When I studied the report that was done to the president on the commission who looked into the Deepwater Horizon disaster and found that one man's decision, one man's desire to meet the budget, stay on time. The crew was running behind in the drilling process. To see that one person's decision caused this huge disaster that included not just the life of 11 people, but those who also survived, who continue to suffer from PTSD and other illnesses related to this, that the spill oiled 1,300 miles of beach in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, and Florida. I mean, the comprehensive extent of this disaster is just hard to grapple with. The impact on the recreation industry was a loss of more than $500 million. I know our South Carolina recreation industry would be forever harmed if this sort of thing happened in the Atlantic. There was an unprecedented number of animals, marine life, mammals, turtles, birds, dolphins, you name it, that were irreparably harmed. And then, of course, the fishing populations near the spill site decreased 50 to 80%. And fishermen saw their livelihoods erased in a heartbeat. Oddly enough, my husband and I just ran into a fellow South Louisianan here in North Carolina. He runs a food truck. He and his wife run a food truck selling Cajun food. And we started talking, and it turns out he ran one of the boats that had to do the cleanup. And he and the workers on his boat had to put out those pontoons that sucked up the oil and then bring those pontoons onto the boat to take in to be cleaned and to go out and suck up more oil. He said every day he and his men were covered head to toe in crude, in vile, carcinogenic stuff that, to this day is still there in some ways in the Gulf. So it's just really difficult for anyone, especially somebody who's actually worked in the industry, to get their heads around the devastation that this one man's decision caused. There are a lot of ways to protect people on a rig. There are a lot of safety measures in place, but you can't fix a bad human decision. You can't prevent against people who make mistakes. So this concern continues into the future. There's no way to make perfectly safe offshore oil and gas drilling.
Peg, I really want to say that I appreciate what you just said about there's no way anywhere where there's drilling, there's spilling. And one of the most shocking things that I have, learned over this time, not only will it devastate economies, it devastates lives when things happen. And of course, the oil industry, they're making their money. I mean, I don't fault the workers, they got jobs to do. But there have been over 7,000 spills since the Deepwater Horizon disaster. 7,000 spills. That is just unimaginable. So if you take it to what Peg said, 100 miles of coastline, you're talking about wiping out the people, the culture, the seafood industry, and everything that we depend on.
I didn't know if you wanted me to make some remarks, but I'll be happy to. Um, the more I learned after the immediate tragedy of the Deepwater Horizon, but Peg and Sandra both have touched on it, the ongoing negative impact, but of the Deepwater Horizon, but also just the ongoing negative impact of oil drilling. They're the same, but they're also separate. And I don't think people really realize the cost that we have paid in the environmental justice realm, which that impacts everyone. We tend to think of that as black and brown, which it is, because it did come out of black and brown communities. But if we don't have justice in our black and brown communities, we don't have justice anywhere, right? But the impact on our environment, the impact on our economy long term, honestly, it's just not worth it. And it's one of the things that has always driven the Gullah Geechee Chamber. The environmental work informs us because of who we are, but also we understand that if we do not maintain a healthy environment, water and land, you cannot have healthy people. You cannot have healthy communities. And I think it's just so important to take this 15th anniversary and reiterate once again the importance of understanding the impact of the Deepwater Horizon, but understanding the human cost, the cost to nature of not only a huge event, but how many did you say, Sandra? 8,000, 7,000, 8,000 spills? And I don't know if you're including leaks in that. I learned about leakage.
Well, this is just in the
Yeah.
ocean. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, but the leakage of things we don't see it where it's invisible to us. And I learned so much. And quite frankly, it made me angry. And it made I channel that anger into energy now. So I'm still angry, but but I am channeling it into energy. And I do want people to really want to get educated about offshore drilling and educated on the impact to our human survival and quality of life.
Thank you so much, everyone. Marilyn, I think those long-term impacts are so key to keep in mind because we're now 15 years out from this disaster, right? And every time we go back to check some numbers, to recalculate the footprint of the spill, recalculate those downstream costs of the oil spill on any human health, economy, whatever it is, it's worse than we originally thought, right? It's always bigger and more destructive than we could have imagined when it first occurred. And um, speaking of long term, I mean, you all have been working to oppose offshore drilling for a long time now, well over a decade, I think we could safely say. So I'm curious to know if you feel that in your time doing that work, you think attitudes have changed at all towards offshore drilling, either like in your community or with the decision makers that you've spoken to? Are people less open to drilling now than they were 10 years ago? Have they forgotten what damage an oil spill can do? And are they now more willing to open up? What has changed that you've noticed?
If I might, I'll just jump in here with my sense. Because we on our coast in South Carolina, we got a 10-year break, so to speak, from the president who said we're not going to drill off of South Carolina, and certain states were exempt. And then it ended up President Biden, in his time, protected the entire Atlantic coast. And now we're back to maybe that's not okay because there's an executive order and we may not be protected. And now we have just found out that they're trying to replace the prior plan. I say all that to bring to the point, out of sight, out of mind. And I feel like there's a lot of people who aren't even aware of the issue, especially where I live. We have had a huge influx of new residents. They don't know a thing about offshore drilling or the threat of it.
Out of sight, out of mind was exactly the thing that ran through my head too. I think that we did a great job of educating the folks who were being threatened along the Atlantic coast. And also, in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, that is also at risk, as well as California coast and the Alaska coast. So 8 years ago, 5 to 8 years ago, I would say I felt pretty good about people understanding what the threat was. But I agree with Sandra on two fronts. One is a lot of people who have moved to the coasts plural, who were not aware of the threat and now will be revisited with that under the current administration. And secondly, the image that people have of how gasoline arrives at the pump is, not based in any reality. You don't think when you're filling up your car with gasoline about the rigs that have been offshore, the potential risks, as we saw from the Deepwater Horizon disaster. You don't think about the onshore infrastructure. You don't think about Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is known as Cancer Alley. You don't appreciate the cost and the forever impact of bringing offshore drilling to a new area. The Gulf of Mexico, bless their hearts, is forever affected in a very negative way by the onshore infrastructure that comes from offshore drilling, from bringing in the product from the rigs, from the refineries that turn it into jet fuel or gasoline, from the holding tanks of diesel that, a fire in a refinery then becomes a huge disaster in an area. And a word on Marilyn's comment on environmental justice. Marilyn has taught me a lot along the way too, as well, about the harm to communities, especially poor shore oil and gas refinery and exporting infrastructure. Those people are forever harmed by breathing the air that's polluted around these refineries, by having a water quality that is untenable, that is harmful, again, just by virtue of where they live. I recently had the opportunity to speak before the testify before the House Committee on Natural Resources, Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources, and I'm trying to use that anger in a good way. I was personally affronted when a congressman said that I was calling them names by using terms like environmental justice and calling Cancer Alley what it is, Cancer Alley. I mean, that name has stuck with that area for decades. And this Republican representative was insinuating that that was name calling. That's not name calling. That's the honest to God truth about what it's like to live in these areas. So yeah, I could go on. I'll be quiet for a minute.
I totally get you, Peg, with the so-called name calling. We have a current administration that has indicated that they're quite willing to remove safeguards. This was not offshore drilling, but they recently rescinded a lawsuit that they basically settled the lawsuit and to protect minority, primary Black community in Louisiana and basically threw it away. That indicates, unfortunately, a foreboding for the future that things may not go the way we would want them to go. So, how does that relate to the question of the awareness of people? I do agree that to an unfortunate certain extent that people have gotten passive about this. Uh, and just taking for granted the quality of our life because it has not happened. Which begs the question of why would you want to put infrastructure in place to make it happen? Because once you get the infrastructure in place, it is going to happen because that's the nature of the beast. But I do think people, Sandra indicated, many people have moved into, in particular, South Carolina, but up and down, you know, the Atlantic seaboard, the East Coast, getting to the water, but isn't the thing that you enjoy the thing that you should protect and celebrate? And offshore drilling is not going to do that. So as a people, I think we need to make some decisions. Do we have short-term satisfaction or do we have long-term good quality of life? So this is why we have these conversations. But I think in general, people um, do have the out of sight, out of mind mentality.
And I would just add one more thing. I think it's going to be important to rally some troops for Georgetown and the port of Georgetown because now we have an empty paper mill, an empty steel mill, and I was recently reading about they want to do some kind of shipbuilding there, but it was also mentioned that the LNG exports that they're going to need these facilities for things like that. And I'm just thinking, with everything that's happening, I do believe that the Port of Georgetown may be in the crosshairs again.
I would agree with that. And it takes education. And you would think that they would give the Port of Georgetown rest because let's be honest, losing the paper mill, steel mill actually is good for the environment, but it's going to take time to recover. We still have other industries that are continuing polluting. The Sapit River, which empties into Winyah Bay, which empties into the Atlantic Ocean. You would think that we would look at clean industries or uh, uh, economic engines that would give our environment time to recover as much as it can recover, considering we've almost had almost 100 years of just polluting the water. And then to add possibly offshore drilling and other industries, I just don't know where it stops. And quite frankly, just think about the human cost. You know, we've paid a huge price.
Um, We covered a lot just now. And you all have alluded to some major victories, like for example, with the Trump administration issuing a moratorium on offshore drilling in the Southeast 5 years ago, or the Biden administration issuing a permanent moratorium off almost all of our coastline earlier this year. And we've also alluded to some major kind of low points or maybe bummers, as I might call them. So I'm curious to hear. Specifically, if you can pick out like your highest high or your lowest low in the course of working to oppose offshore drilling and how you decided to keep going. How did you know that the victory wasn't over yet after that high? And how did you decide to keep at the work when you felt like you might have lost?
All of the all of the legislation associated with offshore drilling has timelines associated with it. So whenever BOEM, which is part of the Department of Interior, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, whenever they allow any kind of offshore development, it's on a timeline. So theoretically, access to our federal resources, our national resources, the offshore resources owned by every American, are granted to oil and gas companies for a certain amount of time and dependent on their using it well and being good, well, theoretically, being good stewards of the environment. The reality, so highs and lows, we knew going into this fight that it would be a roller coaster. Probably for me, one of the highs was the day we got to celebrate on the beach in Litchfield, North Litchfield, when President Obama stopped the offshore drilling in the Atlantic, but he didn't stop seismic testing. So we had a half win, but it was enough to bring out the champagne. One of the lows was personally probably the third trip to Washington meeting with Senator Graham's staff. I believe we convinced them that there was nothing good to come from offshore oil and gas drilling to the state of South Carolina, especially. And Lindsey Graham would never say that he opposed offshore drilling and seismic testing. So it was a low that we couldn't get him on board. Neither actually senator from South Carolina got on board. But the high was one day I got a call from Graham's, I think he was the head of Graham's campaign for reelection. And he called me and said, what's it going to take? We want SOTA's support for Graham's campaign. And I was like, we're not supporting Senator Graham until he protects our coast. So for me, that we had gotten into the psyche of Graham's campaign manager and that they understood that the people of South Carolina were not going to put up with someone who supported destroying our coast for offshore oil and gas drilling. So that was a high. And then ultimately, I guess, when then President Trump, in his first tour of duty, put a hiatus. But the overall joy came when President Biden protected via 12A a statute that would protect the coasts forever. That was the super high point. And then again, another low point when Trump came in immediately thereafter and said, I'm going to overrule President Biden's decision. So highs and lows is the name of the game, and you take the wins when you can, and you go have a drink when you lose.
I think the the whole cycle runs with oil and gas. You have boom and bust. It's quite interesting. I think we started off this conversation, Peg, when you were saying uh, we are the top producer. So, you know, I think the high point for me was being completely educated and able to speak about this issue with so many people. Um, and it took some time, but it is refreshing to know that we as BAPAC and as SODA and as individuals, we and have educated so many people about offshore drilling. And once they understood everything, that really did have an impact. And I think it still does, although it may not be on people's radar right now. Um, I think we have calls to get it back on people's radar, especially with the new interior pro or executive order that came out this morning.
I don't think I've ever thought I've had a highest of a high in this one because the work continues. I do talk about culture a lot, so I think I make that makes it a little esoteric, but that just informs the work. Uh, we have a very pragmatic approach. One of the things that we've done is think about what are the alternatives. So last year, we, in partnership with Seven Dimensions Outreach and Solar United National, we sponsored our first workforce development and solar panel installation and electric vehicle charging stations. And we've left in place the actual building I'm sitting in, the first solar powered electric vehicle charging station in the state of South Carolina. So we're real pragmatic about, yes, we're against this, but we still need energy, right? What are the alternatives? And making an investment of time and money in those. And now hopefully we're working on a grant so that we could expand to 20 to 25 additional sites um, um, up and down the coast from North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. So we're really so it's not about the highest high or the lowest low. It's about keeping the work going. And that gives great satisfaction.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm cognizant of the fact that we just have a few more minutes, probably only time for one more question before we have to wrap up. And I want to make sure that we don't make our audience too sad about the state of our offshore resources, because there very much still is hope. So I would love to hear from each of you. What is one piece of optimism that you're holding on to right now? And it can be related or unrelated to offshore drilling.
I will start. My piece of optimism is if you give people the information and help them to understand it based on truth and facts, they do get it. And I think right now people have gotten into their little corners, but through this process and being involved with trying to protect our coast, I mean, we have educated legislators, we have educated educators. You know, I mean, we have really met people where they are and helped them to understand this. And I believe that'll always remain the case.
I think Sandra said it best. I mean, the difference that engaged people make in our democracy, the difference that informed people make in our democracy, is the thing that keeps me optimistic about the future. To be able to, like I said, just meet these folks at a food truck selling Cajun food, and to hear them still remember what the horror of Deepwater Horizon was like and how it impacted their lives, and yet they are now advocates advocates for protecting our coast. Once people feel it in their own lives, they become the best advocates. We had these horrendous impacts from Hurricane Helene up here in the western North Carolina mountains, and the scars will be here forever from what took place there. And people get it, that what is happening in our climate, the floods, the fires, the hurricanes, the storms, the tornadoes, is connected to the burning of fossil fuels. People are beginning to understand that. They're beginning to think, when they go to fill up their cars, what is my footprint here? What is the harm that I am causing our planet by using petroleum products? It's true for plastics as well. It's so great, again, here away from the coast, that people are not opting to take plastic bags at the store. They're bringing in their bag. So I'm incredibly optimistic in what I see in the day-to-day of how this turns people around once they've had a firsthand experience of what they can do, how they can advocate, how they can personally make a difference. I think there's hope for the future.
I believe in human ingenuity and intelligence, so I totally agree with Peg and Sandra. There is great opportunity there. I woke up this morning, I'm sitting right now, right in the window outside my office, blue skies, beautiful spring day. We wake up every day, there's opportunity, and there's opportunity for us to do better, because as humans, we're smart enough to figure it out. And if we could get out of our corners, as Sandra said, and we could go and enjoy some good Cajun food, as Peg noted. That's human ingenuity and intelligence. The problem is we don't need to get to the bad place. Before we get there, we need to go and find the opportunities to do it better. And we can do that. We can do that if we just get educated and get out of our corners. So that's what we should be excited about.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, the people have the power to make the change. I think you teed up the end of this presentation really well for me. I'm gonna quickly share my screen again. Bear with me here. But you have an opportunity to have a say here, right? This isn't just something that is going to happen to you. And we would really rather it didn't, which is why we're all here today to have this conversation. So we invite everyone watching to take action with us. On the left-hand side of the screen is a QR code that will go to the website for the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast, also known as BAPAC. Please check them out at protectingtheatlanticcoast.org, or feel free to send them an email at protecttheatlantic@gmail.com if you have a question about what you heard in this conversation today. We'd be more than happy to take a stab at answering it. And then we also encourage you to go to oceana.org/actnow, or scan the QR code that's on the right-hand side of the screen. That will take you to a petition that will send a note directly to your elected official in Congress, and tell them that you don't want to see any more offshore drilling off the US coast. We have plenty of oil and gas, as everyone on this call has said. We don't need any more, and we definitely don't need an oil spill off of our coasts. Y'all wrapped it up into a bow better than I ever could, but we are armed with the knowledge. We have the lessons, the devastating lessons that we can take from the Deepwater Horizon disaster, and we know better now, right? So we can take that knowledge and we can move forward and find different ways to get what we need. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. And thank you so much to our panelists. Once again, Peg Howell, Marilyn Hemingway, and Sandra Bundy from Stop the Offshore Drilling in the Atlantic, the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast, and the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce, of course. So we really appreciate y'all sitting in today and sharing all of your amazing knowledge and wisdom with us. And we appreciate everyone who took the time to tune in. And we hope that we'll hear from you soon. We hope that we'll get some questions and have even more conversations down the road, because we're still on the roller coaster, whether we like it or not. So we'll be here for as long as it takes. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.